Let's talk about generational wealth. It's more than a number in a bank or the direction of a line on a graph. Wealth's true value lies in how it can make our lives better. It's a journey built on trust, choices that let you sleep, not leave you sleepless. Knowing that your wealth will be accessible when you need it. At Ledn, we believe Bitcoin holders should experience the wealth of their digital assets in exactly the same way as everybody else. Whether that's putting your grandchild through college, leaving the world a better place, or ensuring your family will always have a place to call home.
When people choose to work with Ledn, they're entrusting us with their most precious asset. And to us, that's an immense privilege, and we see that as a big responsibility as well.
If I go back to the core of our mission at Ledn, this is really about building generational wealth and making that universally available to our clients.
We can do it in a way that we believe is protecting them while allowing them to participate in products that allow them to use their digital wealth to generate additional wealth, or to use their digital holdings to generate borrowings that can change their lives.
Introducing Ledn Private Wealth. Exclusive products, services, and access to help you secure your legacy.
Welcome, everybody. I'm going to give a few more minutes to join. I see we have a lot of people already in the participating in the chat. I'm going to give people one more minute to join us, and then we'll get started.
Love that video, Mauricio.
Thank you.
Yeah, well done. How long has that been out?
It's been out for a few months. When we were making the big announcement for private wealth. It's a video that's I personally love it because I think it highlights so well what we do. It's on our YouTube, so I'll put the link here when we post this.
Yeah, well done, I think.
Thank you. Oh, we have someone sneaking in here. Remove.
That's me now.
Oh, John, do you mind dropping? Sorry, that might have been a mistake on the link.
Okay, no worries, I'll drop.
All right. Well, on that note, I think we're good to start. I see there's a bunch of people already in the attendees. So welcome, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where in the world you are. Welcome to a very special Ledn Private Wealth webinar. Today, we'll be having a fireside chat with legendary macro investor and also a member of Ledn's board of directors, Dan Tapiero. In today's session, we're going to be going over the questions submitted by you, our Ledn Private Wealth clients, and the session should take us around 45 minutes. If you have to drop for any reason, don't worry. The contents of this interview will be recorded and posted in our socials and YouTube later on. And we're going to try our best. And Dan has been so kind to take a few questions from the audience. So if we have time at the end, we're going to go through them. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to them towards the end of the session. Before we get started, I'm going to share a few words on Dan's impressive career before we get into the questions. For those who may not know, Dan is the founder, CEO, CIO, and Managing Partner of One Roundtable Partners and 10T Holdings. The combined entities manage $1.2 billion worth of investments across 26 private companies in the digital asset ecosystem. One Roundtable Partners is now the only active growth stage investor that's exclusively focused in the blockchain and crypto space. Dan serves on several boards, including Ledger, Ledn, as we mentioned, Futureverse, and Quicknode. Before founding One Roundtable Partners and 10T, Dan was the managing partner of DTAP Capital Advisors, a global macro investment fund that he founded in 2003. He's also the co-founder of Gold Bullion International, a physical precious metals platform for the wealth management industry that also expanded into the cryptocurrency universe back in 2014. He is the co-founder of Agricultural Company of America, one of the largest farmland REITs in the US at the time of its sale to the Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board in 2013. Dan has worked with some of the world's most renowned investors like Stan Druckenmiller, Steve Cohen, and others. And today we have the great privilege and the pleasure of sitting down with him to go over your questions. So without further ado, thank you for joining us today, Dan. How are you doing?
Hey, Mauricio. Great to be here. I'm doing well. I love that, as I was saying before, I love that video that you put together. I think that, that's, I'm always interested in things that are unique. I haven't seen something like that from a business in the crypto, blockchain, Web3 space. The names of how we characterize the space we're in, it's constantly changing. I sort of like to use digital asset ecosystem, which is a broad enough characterization. But that video, I thought really, and the concept of Ledn private wealth, I think is a new step forward for you guys. So
thank you, Dan.
Together.
Thank you, Dan. I really appreciate that. And as we were working on the video, we were looking for a way of really expressing what these services are all about. And I also love the term digital asset ecosystem, by the way. It's my preferred term in the myriad of jargon that is thrown at this industry. I think it's the most elegant, but we'll keep calling it that or referring to it that way as we get through this, since we're both, it's both of our favorites. So we have a bunch of questions that we got from our private wealth clients that I'll start with now, and then we'll get into the ones that are dropped in by the audience.
Mauricio, I thought before we got into those questions, there was something I wanted to ask you about the recent developments in Argentina.
Absolutely.
It's so timely right now. Could you just give us maybe your 30-second analysis of what's going on there, and how vital has Bitcoin been to some of the people there in recent weeks?
Oh, wow. It's a great question. It's something I'm very passionate about. So Bitcoin and stable coins have been have had the focus or the spotlight on them since Javier Milei won the primary, which was a shock to many. Javier Milei is an outsider candidate. He's running on a platform of dollarizing the country and completely deregulating the digital asset ecosystem in Argentina. So allowing all service providers to come in and participate and basically fight to compete to offer the best products to their people. What's been really fascinating is a couple of things. One, a lot of people did not see his victory coming. And it's largely on the back of the fact that so many people have been disappointed by the previous governments. They're picking a complete outsider that's coming to, quote unquote, burn down the central bank because they are so fed up with the broken promises. So my friends from Argentina that I've spoken with since the election are very excited naturally, but they've also been cautiously optimistic because there's a long stretch between winning the primary and winning the election. And they're seeing that now everyone else, the incumbents, are going to try to gang up on Milei as they go into the final election. So what's really happening is Milei is running on this platform of dollarizing Argentina, removing the ability for the central bank to print and be corrupt with how they disperse these new pesos that they print, and deregulating Bitcoin and crypto and allowing essentially everybody to come in and fight to offer Argentinians the best services.
Wow. Well, hopefully that'll benefit Ledn's business.
Absolutely. Argentina is a great market for us. Election is on October 26th. We're following that very closely. And don't be surprised if you see Ledn in Argentina before the end of this year. So that's the 30-second rundown, but I'm this is something I can go on and on about. But that's great. Thank you for that. I will, and I'm actually writing our weekly blog about this. So our weekly blog will come out tomorrow, and I'm happy to send you a copy of it because I'm literally writing about this as we speak. Argentina is largely trying to recreate what Ecuador and what El Salvador did when they dollarized their economies. Their inflation rates went from 90 to low single digits within months. Wow. So it's worked in the past, and I think that's what Milei is excited about. But anyway, we'll go into that at length in tomorrow's essay. So I will get started with these questions if you think it's okay.
Sure.
And if you have any others for me, feel free to shoot.
Yeah,
this is
no
excellent.
worries.
So the first question we've gotten is, you have commented that you see the market capitalization of the digital asset ecosystem, which includes Bitcoin, Ethereum, stablecoins, and tokenized assets, in the 10 to 20 trillion dollar range over the next decade. Could you shed some light on how you arrived at this estimate?
Sure. We have a great page in our deck for the fund that explains this. I'm sorry I didn't bring it along with me. And it's actually quite simple. The total value within the digital asset ecosystem, so that's the value of all the cryptocurrencies in the world and also the value of all the equity combined, is at about $1.7 trillion today. When I had the idea for the fund in the middle of 2019, it was 300 billion. So it's already 5x in 4 years. Now that's down from the peak 18 months ago of 3.2 trillion. So look, I understand people say, oh, the space, it's gone down in value. Yes, it's 50% off the high. However, it's still up, almost it's up over 5 times in the last 4 years. So when you zone out, we have been increasing at a very rapid pace. And so what I looked at was the rate of adoption of the internet. So if you go back to the mid-90s, so far, the rate of adoption of cryptocurrency, and broadly measured as the number of digital wallets that are out there, has been increasing at a pace faster than the adoption of the internet. But let's just assume that it's been exactly the same to date. And so I looked at where we were, and I saw that in 1998, that there were 4% of the world had access to the internet, just 4%. And today, 4% of the world have digital wallets or crypto accounts. And so what I did then was, as a longtime macro investor, portfolio manager, I said, okay, well, what happens over the next 10 years? From 98 to 08, internet adoption increased from 4% to 24%. So that's a 6x. And so if I look at where we are today, 1.7 trillion, do I think over the next 10 years, based on the rate of adoption, that the value in the space will grow by 6x? That takes you to 11 trillion right there. And that's a very simple back of the envelope measure. There's been a lot of analysis done on this, and you can look at it all sorts of different ways. You can look at growth of the money supply. You could look at, what percent of total world assets could be potentially tokenized or put on a blockchain. I mean, some people say the total assets globally are, let's just say, $500 trillion. So if you look at not just Bitcoin and Ethereum and all the cryptocurrencies and all the equity, if you start to think about all the assets out there that could be tokenized, anything of value potentially put on a blockchain and reside in the digital asset ecosystem, it only takes 1% of that world is 5 trillion, right? So you say 5% would be 25 trillion. I think this year, one of the most exciting developments, and Mauricio, I'm sure you've been reading about RWAs, which are real world, the tokenization of real world assets has gone from, essentially, I think up 700 or 800% this year, 100 million, I think, to 800. Anyway, it's a very, very, in very early stages. I do have this very broad definition of what the digital asset ecosystem is. And so that would include stable coins. That does include tokens in blockchain gaming. It would include, so it's an expansive definition. But if you want to limit the definition and just say, the value of Bitcoin, to be honest, I mean, I don't see why Bitcoin can't go up, at least 10x from where we are today. I think it's at 300-400 billion roughly. I don't see why not. We can talk about this in a minute, but I mean, it's the sort of hardest form of money, the purest collateral, monetary collateral that has ever existed. And that was one of the reasons I was drawn to investing in Ledn, was because you also perceived and deal with Bitcoin as pure collateral, right? And so I think that the value of it today, a few $100 billion, is definitely undervalued. And when we say it can go up 6x in 10 years, it's a very conservative estimate. So
Thank you so much for sharing that. And at Ledn, we like simple. So simple is great. And it's simple yet very, very insightful analysis. And I'm sure people will appreciate how you got to that conclusion. Completely agree that Bitcoin is the world's best collateral. Obviously, we're biased because that's what we do, but we do believe it. You know, we've lived through the use case, particularly myself and my family. So no doubt about the future of this. On a follow-on from that, is there a particular area in the digital asset ecosystem, of course, besides lending, that you or your funds are excited about right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned before we were even talking about the tokenization of real world assets. And there are a few companies. We have another investment in a company called Figure that is focused on this. You know, there are a few, there's Securitize. It's very early days and probably too early for us. We tend to look at investments generally that would have, let's say, north of 40 million in revenue. And of course, none of those businesses do it at this moment. We just made a very small investment in the secondary market into a stablecoin business. I think that Circle, for instance, is a fantastic business. Last year, you had $8 trillion of stablecoins settled. And, you know, that's versus 0 3 years ago. I'm not so sure people understand how fast certain parts of this world are growing. And I think that it's not just, it may be Circle leading the way. Again, you know, they dominate the regulated sort of compliant market. You have Tether that's offshore. But when an ecosystem grows from 0 to that kind of number, you know, there are all sorts of other companies, other business lines that will start to develop. And then you saw, of course, are you with me or have I lost?
Yeah. No, I'm with you.
You know, that Coinbase, of course, is now taking a bit of a stake in Circle. And I just think that once these companies have reached a certain level, and again, for me, this is, again, the growth stage, 40 to 50 million in revenue or more, they really have the ability to move into other areas. And so I think the next 3 to 5 years, the focus of investors will be less on maybe the trading, the trading of the financial aspects of cryptocurrency. And I think it's spreading out today. The whole concept, for instance, of, you know, Web 2 moving to Web 3, which is, you know, a term that Andreessen coined, I think has been very powerful because the pushback that I used to get from traditional investors was, you know, oh, there's no use case for cryptocurrency. And all of a sudden now you're seeing all sorts of traditional, you know, Fortune 500 companies trying to figure out how to incorporate the blockchain into their business models. You know, for me, one of the obvious financial use cases, again, back to Ledn, was, you know, borrowing and lending, and Bitcoin is pure collateral. And, you know, I'm expecting soon that you'll also be moving into Ethereum. I think Bitcoin and Ethereum have achieved network effect. I do see Ethereum as collateral as well. And, you know, I know that some of the yields that you can also offer on stable coins and other things are quite attractive now too. And so, I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about a little bit of specifics with the audience. I mean, about what's on offer today, because I haven't checked the site today to see what the most recent up-to-date yields are, but I think it's very attractive.
Yeah, so we're right now our growth accounts for USDC are paying out 9% APY. On the Bitcoin side, it's 1% APY, and the on the loan side of things, we are lending the dollars out at 12.9. So at Ledn, we always like being very transparent. You know, the reason we can pay 9 is because we lend at 12.9. And it's a very simple business. And to your point, the point you just made on this trend towards real world assets, if you look at the video clearly says Ledn is where your digital assets come to life. We've always been wanting to play that role of connecting people's digital assets with real life experience and making one get expressed in the other, right? Expressing your wealth and your digital wealth into the real world. And these trends that I see that you very well mentioned, real world assets and stable coins, keep driving the digital asset ecosystem away from this abstraction of living in the cloud and literally making your lives better, whether it is by paying with stable coins or being able to protect yourself from inflation, using yield services like ours, buying a house, tokenizing a real world asset. I also believe that this is where this is going. And so it's always exciting to see some of those views get aligned because, of course, we tremendously respect your view in terms of where this is going.
Yeah, it's interesting, and we probably should talk about it a little bit. We don't really talk about this at the board meetings. Board meetings are looking at the analysis of the company, et cetera. But certainly, there is a world where even Ledn potentially can move into actually tokenizing some of these real world assets of some of your clients, especially under the heading of private wealth. If you have a client who has an asset that can be tokenized, you potentially would be able to, lend against that asset as well. I know we're maybe talking about things a little into the future, but I think that would be very exciting. And look, you are, one of the only, in my mind, the only sort of centralized lender that survived the mess from 22. And so, I think that, the digital asset ecosystem broadly still recovering from the fallout from some of the FTX mess. But the reality is that, in my view, at least, the bear market is over, and it ended, in Q4, several weeks right after the FTX collapse. And right now, we're at the very, very early stages of a bull phase. And so, I could imagine us, maybe still going sideways, up and down, for another 6 months, 9 months. But I'm hoping that as confidence returns to the space, that potentially, you are able to start looking at these alternative business lines for Ledn, but also alternative products for your private wealth clients. I think, I think you probably have the skill set, internal to the company. And if you don't, you easily be able to acquire it to build those products.
It's a great point, Dan, and we're starting to head more in the direction of combining your digital wealth with your real wealth. A kind of first step on that was the Bitcoin mortgage that we announced. And again, it's not a tokenized document or a tokenized property yet today, at least, but we could easily see how that could turn into a tokenized title or something along those lines that could make it even easier to process and to do business. And it doesn't have to stop at real estate, right? Like you can look at potentially tokenizing other assets and starting with what the highest quality, most liquid markets are, and then progressively looking at the others. But that's our business, is to make people's lives better or to put out products that drive value to the real world experience. And as the world goes more digital and as assets get more and more digital, that's in the direction that our services will probably be heading as well.
Yeah, let me say one thing also. I think the opportunity exists because, the banking system is really outdated here in the US. And we see that, of course, this is, the banking crisis that we had. And I still think it might be lingering a little bit, underneath the surface, but many banks have turned away, not just from, lending. I mean, you see the boom on Wall Street in private credit. And I think that as they turned away from basic lending practices in 2008, there's almost no chance that the banks are going to move into this area of tokenization, lending on tokenized assets. And so there's a wonderful runway, I think, for companies like Ledn to really establish themselves and offer their clients these kind of more innovative products. And that's what excites me sort of long-term about Ledn as an investor. But for someone on the private wealth side, as a client, I think that would be very exciting. And of course, as clients know, businesses respond to what clients want. So if you have enough clients asking you for a certain product, maybe they'll come quicker, it'll come quicker. So I just think it's a unique opportunity now. I don't know how long it lasts. At some point, the larger institutions, wherever they are, even ones outside the U.S. that maybe are a little more forward-thinking, thinking ahead, will likely get into this area. But for now, the U.S. institutions are behind, and it's not going to be this way forever. I just think for now, we're sort of at the edge of innovation, and there's a great chance for you to really establish yourself in the space.
I appreciate it, and I completely second that. We build based on what our clients want. That is why the mortgage was birthed or was born, because we had so many clients asking us and telling us that they couldn't get mortgages at their bank, even though they were very wealthy in Bitcoin terms. And if by doing the mortgage and combining the property and their digital asset as collateral, they were able to use less collateral and use their Bitcoin for other things, and buy the house of their dreams that wasn't available without a service like Ledn. They would have had to sell their Bitcoin and pay a huge capital gains tax on that property. So to all of the clients or everybody listening, drop us a comment, send us a note if there's a product that you would like to see from Ledn. We of course are in the business of making things happen for you.
Mauricio, I think that the advancements on the product side, I think you would have already made, frankly, if it hadn't been for the bad actors in the space. SBF, and then also you have Celsius and BlockFi. They really set the space back, and I do call them bad actors in a way, because some of the things that they were doing weren't really necessary, right? They were driven by greed and by excess. And one of the things I appreciated about Ledn was that you were, more calm, more focused, not reaching out and doing a million different things. You stayed focused on what you thought were core things. And I just think that, I think you'd already be at this next level if the space hadn't gotten set back by that. I just think, look, it's natural that in any area where there's innovation, that there are going to be bad actors, and there are going to be charlatans and all sorts of people, just exaggerating, their ability to help their clients, exaggerating, pushing for more and more and more. And to some degree, that's always going to be there. But the space, because it's so open and open to innovation, you do have these bad actors. So I'm pretty confident now that you've survived the worst of things, that you could take a lead role in innovation on the product front. And so I think it's just a matter of time.
We are glad to take that leadership role and then rebuild this industry. We're doing this. We've been shipping nonstop all year. In transparency, responsibility, accountability. We've continued doing a proof of reserves. We have a new one coming in a month or so. We've done our open book report. We have shipped the dual cryptocurrency notes and our growth accounts, which now ring fence risk in those deal generating activities. And we're going to continue through that process of ring fencing risk so that our clients can feel safer every time they use our products.
And I think that's the benefit. Some people, they shy away when there are problems, but the companies that survive and eventually are the ones that lead the industry, are the ones who manage through those problems. I am pretty sure that you guys will not, regardless of what happens in the future, you're not getting in trouble. There isn't going to be the bumps. You'll know how to navigate in the future. Having been a portfolio manager for 30 years and having to mark to market every day, every week, every month, and for 20 plus years in the live markets, I've had many setbacks, and managing money is always 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and managing risk, there are always problems. But you get to a point where you've already seen the problems, know what the yellow flags are. And I think not just investors, but clients of yours should have more confidence than ever in your company. And I can't say this for all of our companies. Some of our companies haven't experienced any difficulty. They make me a little nervous because sometimes they're flying a little high. But you've really taken a lot of very strong steps to cement the base of the business, the firm. I think the people you have on board right now, it's your core team, very high quality team. And so, I have more confidence now that the future is better for you, frankly, than I did when I invested in the beginning, because there was always the possibility that there would be an issue or problem down the line. My view now is the probability that there's some sort of issue or bump is dramatically reduced. And so I know it's a bit of a contrarian type of view, but I like to invest in companies and businesses that have survived and have shown that they can survive a difficult period. So I'm expecting some of these innovative products coming out of you in the next 18 to 24 months. And certainly when the new bull phase begins in earnest, and I think that second half of 24, 25 will have digested, I think, enough of the problems in the space. And then also, I think the interest rate stress from the Fed raising will be finished. I think it'll be finished actually quite soon. So I'm very confident that I'm going to be seeing some of those exciting products.
You're absolutely right. You should see our roadmap is really packed from now until the end of the year, and we have some really exciting stuff early in 2024 as well. So can't wait to show you. And thank you for the kind words. We've managed so many ups and downs so far in this business, even though we've only started it in 2018, but we did the 2018 bear market cycle. Then we had the Three Arrows collapse, then run it all the way back up. And then we had the FTX collapse. So, we've been through a few cycles, and we believe that this makes the company even stronger and more resilient. So appreciate your support, of course, and the kind words. I'll jump to another question here. So that we keep this on track to get to our client questions. Can you speak about the importance of lending market infrastructure in general, in commodity markets like gold and in financial assets more broadly? And how important do you think it will be for the digital asset ecosystem?
Oh, look, I think it's vital. The lending infrastructure in gold is very complex. I guess they're asking because I've traded gold since the 90s, but also because I have this physical gold company, GBI. We're the third largest vaulter of physical gold in the world outside of the banking system. And so it's actually grown to quite a nice business. We don't do much lending there, but in the, I call it institutional gold markets, of course, you have the GOFO rate, and the lending markets, the gold lending markets are very well developed. I think, unfortunately, a little opaque, at least opaque to me. I think the similarity with the Bitcoin space would be that, gold, of course, is seen as a AAA asset. And so you don't really pick up much yield, by lending out gold. There isn't much risk associated, like the market doesn't associate much risk with gold. And then there are leveraged markets. You can buy gold in the futures market, putting down, a very, very small percent. So there is a sort of, and that's a form of lending, in a sense. The exchange or whoever it is lending you the other 99%, or just assuming that the net of the profits will get carried out. But I think that we're really in the very, very first inning of building the infrastructure the lending infrastructure for this space. So I would say that it essentially does not exist yet compared to the traditional markets. Certainly not compared to, the bond markets where you have an extremely deep repo market. These things take years and years to develop. And I would say that we're not even in, if you use a baseball analogy, like the first batter of the first inning. It was the big, I would say even just in 2019, 2020 was the first idea that lending was a valid concept.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what happened was you had some of those people who were pushing that, they blew up because they were greedy and they were and fraudulent. And so now we have, Ledn is left, and maybe there's another one or two companies out there. I think the lending on NFTs is a little bit problematic given the liquidity concerns. And I think that you can't really have a developed lending market on something that is too illiquid. So I've not been a big fan of some of these even decentralized protocols that offer lending on NFTs. I mean, maybe I'm just too old, but that's just a little too much risk for me. So I think the infrastructure is being built now. I think Ledn is a company that will become part of the building of that infrastructure. And it's not clear exactly what form it takes, but my guess is that, the bigger you can eventually build your business, you'll have other people who are fair dealers coming into the space and providing, and then you'll have people providing liquidity also by lending out their Bitcoin. You were saying right now, there's a little bit of a stoppage in terms of the number of people lending out their Bitcoin. Is that right? Or did I mishear you?
Yeah, it's more so it's the demand on the institution side, on the institutional borrowers that we like to work with, the highest quality ones, because of the absence of volatility we've seen in the Bitcoin markets up until really last Friday. The demand to make markets has been relatively tame vis-a-vis what we saw in 2021, but that will come back as volatility comes back, and so will our rates. Our rates will go back up as our utilization rates on those assets goes higher. So that's spot on. And you're also spot on your first batter or the first inning, because as early as 2018, Adam and I were being called crazy for wanting to set up this business. And people literally ask us, why would anyone borrow against their Bitcoin? And the answer today is, why wouldn't anyone borrow against Bitcoin? Totally.
Mauricio, it's sort of the issue of, when Bitcoin had a smaller dollar value, it was less a percentage of people's assets. And so all of a sudden, what happens is if you started out with 5%, and all of a sudden now Bitcoin is 50% of your total net worth, it's a huge percent. And you don't want to sell your Bitcoin, but you know what? Maybe you'd like to move out of your grandmother's basement, right? And get yourself an apartment or something, right? I mean, that's really what I think has happened, is that the value that people have in this world has just become so big. As I said, $1.7 trillion is a lot of money. And the average age of the people holding that 1.7 trillion is under 40 years old. Because let me tell you, there are, very few, I would say, older people over 60, let's say, boomer over 60 people who are involved in this space. I mean, there are some, of course. But that 1.7 trillion largely belongs to people who are, just beginning their grown-up life, right? Age 30, 35, even like late 30s, 40. And so they need to be able, they don't want to sell their Bitcoin, right? But they need to be able to, have some things, like a car or an apartment or whatever. And I think this is an important function, an important service that you're providing them. And I like this concept of Ledn private wealth, because in the future, I think there's going to be more than just one solution, right? It's not just going to be borrow against your Bitcoin. I think they'll have all sorts of other solutions that will pop up.
Of course, Yeah, our private wealth clients, we have other products with the private wealth suite, like our prime loans, which are available to U.S. accredited investors. There's DCNs actually were born as a private wealth product, and it did so well that we then built it into an automated product on the platform. So we're definitely, in fact, our private wealth clients are the ones who get to test and beta test our products first, and are many times the people who suggest what next products we should be building because they come to us with their problems. So it's an amazing group of sort of an innovation engine here at Ledn, and something that we want to keep feeding. There was one other point you made about what percentage of your assets, total assets, this represents, and this is even more true when you go south of Texas, because in the US, people have real estate, and a lot of the larger portfolio compositions here in North America are real estate, stocks, bonds, etc. South of Texas, you have very little access, not to say no access to those things. So Bitcoin is in many ways your portfolio, or digital assets are in many ways your equity equivalents or your bond equivalents. So this is even more true where we do most of our lending. So 100%.
Yeah, I mean,
aligned.
this is one of the reasons, and maybe one of the main reasons that I invested into Ledn, was that for me, this is truly the greatest, largest global macro, I would call it trade, global macro investment of all time, this entire space, because it is truly global. It may be the only asset that is truly global. I mean, I traded currencies for many, many years. And even to this day, there really are only 15 to 20 liquid currencies that an institutional portfolio manager would trade. And those belong to those 15 or 20 countries. The difference with cryptocurrency, especially Bitcoin and Ethereum, is there are people in every single country across the socioeconomic strata who own cryptocurrency, and they own it as a savings technology, is kind of the way I call it. As a method to hold their savings, to save their purchasing power, as we discussed earlier in the call. Argentina, where you're from, prime example. And so as a global macro investor, that really spoke to me, that I would be able to invest in a company that was in the borrowing and lending markets, but that had that similar global perspective. And, I think that now having your domicile now in a global, jurisdiction, I'm also hoping that in the coming months that I'll be able to introduce you to people in Dubai and in the UAE, who I think there might be some potential strategic partnerships for you there. I really do think that this is sort of the most important thing for me, is that you're able to capture that demand coming from the rest of the world. And, as you said, most of your interest is south of Texas, and I definitely see that, but I also see many other areas of the world where you have potential for growth.
No, absolutely, absolutely, and we're very happy to take any or chat with or connect with anyone in Dubai. I know Adam's going to be there in a few weeks, so we'll follow up after the call to set all that stuff up. Sure. You kind of got ahead, I think, of my next question, because the other question that we got asked was, what makes Ledn the best suited firm, in your view, to win this market?
Yeah, and I do think, not every investor has the same perspective. And I am a top-down global macro investor. I also have a little bit of a value bent, which is a little funny to have a value bent in a crypto sector that, it's grown 500% in 4 years. It's not really a value market, but I do approach things from a value perspective. One of the reasons I didn't invest in some of your competitors was that there was the value proposition was not great, and I just didn't. I think the focus was much more on how do you pump the market value of the company, rather than on how do we really grow this business in the future. And I think the TAM, the total addressable market of the world Bitcoin and ETH lending market, is trillions of dollars. And I really do. And so I think that, the fact that you've been able to survive and hopefully now flourish, and you have lots of different places where you can go for that growth, that makes me think that, that you can be the winner in the space. But to tell you the truth, Mauricio, I think there can be a few winners in the space. I don't think it's only one. Something that has a TAM of several $1 trillion, it doesn't have to be only one, winner. But I think you're going to be way out ahead. And you also naturally have, from Argentina, having lived through the problems, you see where the needs are, in Turkey, in Nigeria, in developing world. I think, certainly places that, have banking systems that aren't really as developed. These are all places where you can move in. And I think you have the right outlook, the right philosophy about the business to do it.
Thank you, Dan. I really appreciate that.
Sure.
The next question we have, and we have gotten some questions in from the audience, so I'm going to try to maybe skip to one or two of these that are similar to see if we can get to the questions from the clients that are in the chat. Another question is, how can businesses, both in traditional and the digital asset ecosystem, use Ledn's yield-generating growth accounts or services to optimize their treasury strategy in this environment?
So I'm not exactly sure what that question is, because we've sort of answered that a bunch.
Yeah, I think what I would highlight here to whoever asked this question, if you're watching, is that in terms of the benefits that our growth accounts have vis-a-vis, say a bond in this market, is a couple. One, our rates are materially higher. We're paying 9 versus a 5-ish, depending on where in the world you're looking at the bonds. The other one is our growth accounts are open term. You can deposit and withdraw at any time. With bonds, you would have potential lockup periods, and you may have some principal slippage depending on what rates do with the time you get it and the time it comes to maturity. But I think that captures the differences succinctly. I don't know if you have anything there to add, Dan.
No, again, I'm an investor. I'm not necessarily thinking about things in terms of how one manages one's treasury. So I think it's probably best, the way that you answered it. So that's very good.
Sure. So we'll get to this last one, and then I can go into the two anonymous questions that have been asked here on the chat.
Well, maybe I'll answer just one of those questions on the anonymous, that first one. But anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, of course. So the question, the last one here we have is, what is your market outlook for Bitcoin and the digital asset ecosystem for the balance of the year?
Yeah, I think, as I said, I think the low for the space and for Bitcoin and Ethereum was put in Q4. And I say that because on the announcement of the FTX fraud, which in my view was the most negative, surprising event that could have happened, okay? And on the announcement of that, the Ethereum price couldn't make a new low in price. The Bitcoin price went down, but came back a few days later. That told me, it's a very classic, trading sign, that the selling had dried up. When you can't make a new low in price based on the most negative news that you could possibly imagine, this guy went from being worth $20 billion to being in jail, essentially, in that short a period of time, and the market held its price, told me it was over. I, in fact, deployed $120 million of my third fund right at that moment. The 1/3 remaining of my third fund, we completely deployed into 8 different businesses, because I really felt that was the low in the space. And here we are 8 months later in a consolidation period. And so I think that it's now all the dips that we get are to be bought. I don't think we make new lows again. As I said, I suspect that, we're going to end the year certainly above current prices where we are today. And then I see, still a continued consolidation period, depending on a bunch of different macro variables. But certainly by late 24, early 20, by 25, we could be making new highs, I think, in Bitcoin and Ethereum. And so that would be my view. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And
Sure.
in the last blog, I wrote about just a few of the things that are on queue for the first half of 2024. And you have the start of the US presidential election race, the BlackRock ETF approval potentially, the Bitcoin halving, and potentially the first rate cut from the Fed. And these would all come theoretically within the first 6 months of 2024. So it's going to have some fireworks, I think, and it looks like to be potentially tailwinds.
Yeah. The BlackRock thing is really a big deal because Larry Fink 2 years ago called Bitcoin a fraud, and now he calls it a global asset. Now, that is a really big change for a guy who's running a $10 trillion operation. And as you know, of the ETFs that they've applied for, of the 500, he's only been rejected once. I don't think he's going to get rejected. He's come out publicly. So for Americans, having an ETF is a big deal. I think for the rest of the world, it's not as big a deal. But the US is so stock and equity oriented a culture that it will potentially drive enormous demand. And I saw how this worked with the gold ETF in the early 2000s. It really changed the structure and nature of the gold market. In fact, even today, the options market on the GLD ETF, I think, is more liquid than the gold options market. So it's incredible. I think I haven't traded that in a while, but I think it's incredible. The US is still by far the wealthiest country in the world in turn, and has total assets significantly above everybody else. So it will matter. Yeah.
That's a fascinating point, Dan. And actually, you made a good point that I actually forgot to ask you on one of the questions from the clients above, which was, why do you think that the BlackRock ETF could potentially have such a big impact, given that there's already ETFs in places like Brazil and Canada? And I think you've answered that, perfectly.
Yeah. Also, many U.S. institutions are legally not allowed to own Bitcoin. Right. However, they can own an ETF. And you're talking about tens of trillions of dollars right there. So it doesn't take that much of a percent of that to really change things.
Yeah. And a spot ETF is a much better vehicle for long-term holding than a futures-based ETF, because you keep getting the decay on the future. So 100%. I think we're going to have time for this one. One of the questions we got is, I am curious, with the US issuing another $1.8 trillion worth of debt in 2023 and deficits exploding, do you consider that inflationary?
Yeah, I think that we hit the peak in inflation when the CPI hit 8%, and you can check my Twitter account and everything else. I've pretty much expected that inflation was going to drop every quarter this year, and I suspect it'll continue to do so. There's a 3 handle on the headline CPI. The Fed turned very aggressive on CPI, on inflation, at exactly the wrong moment. They've completely mismanaged this entire cycle. Up at that high, I think a month later, they got scared and decided that they were going to continue to raise rates. In my view, they have overhiked, and growth will also be slowing next year. I don't really know one way or the other. Recession, people have different opinions about that, but I think inflation with the 3 handle now, and I suspect within the next 3 to 5 months we'll have a 2 handle. The Fed cannot raise rates in front of an election with CPI at a 2 or 3 handle. It's just frankly preposterous. I don't know why the Biden administration hasn't clamped down on them a bit more. Maybe they don't understand that the hikes that have happened, which have driven the mortgage rates to very high levels, and I think have dramatically slowed the housing market, is going to hurt their chances for reelection, but maybe at some point they'll figure that out. So I think, no, I don't think issuing bonds has anything to do with, inflation, to be honest. We've been the maximum of fear and reality of inflation has already passed. So.
Thank you for that, Dan. And I think in your point about overshooting the rates and overhiking, if the U.S. is bad, I think Canada, given where our housing market is, it's going to be
look at China too. China's already to slow down pretty dramatically, and Europe, I think, is also weakening. So it's just that it's taken a longer time,
right,
for the market to react. But we always, in my 30 years of investing money, always understood, and the Fed used to talk about it all the time, there's a lag. There's an 18-month lag, generally 24-month lag from rate hikes and rate cuts. And so for some reason, they preferred to panic at the absolute high than trust that there was going to be the normal lag. And so I think we see that drop now already. So.
Well, thank you so much for that, Dan. We've answered the questions that have been submitted. What I would like to end up with or close out with is, can you please tell our viewers where they can learn a little bit more about you or follow you, and if they are interested in learning more about or investing in any of your funds, where can they get more information?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on Twitter at DTAP Cap, and then my website, One Roundtable Partners, onertfund.com. That's for all the funds going forward. That's a good place to go and look, and also you can just reach out to me as well. It's not that hard. So.
Strongly suggest his Twitter account. We quote his insights in our newsletter.
It's been a little sleepy recently, but I'll get back to being more active once the fund is closed. So anyway, thank you so much, Mauricio. This was a real pleasure. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Dan, for spending your valuable time with us today. Thank you all also for joining us and watching. And we'll be back with another private wealth webinar in a few months. Until then, take care. HODL. See you soon. Bye, everybody.